Well, I'd like to look into something a little bit different today. This will be the new independent fundamental Baptist, the new IFB. I saw this on the internet not too long ago, and it kind of interested me because I came out of that movement as well, and I was curious as to what their purpose was of differentiating themselves from the old IFB. I had some issues with the old IFB, and I'm wondering if maybe they saw the same thing, or if this is a movement that would be commendable or whatever. But just examining it, I'd like to try to just give some thoughts on it. There are apparently some changes from the old IFB that they point out. This is from a Twitter account from some individual that they believe in a post-trib, pre-wrath rapture, which would deviate from the pre-millennial or the pre-tribulational rapture. They advertise themselves as anti-dispensational, which I find to be very striking in the sense that IFB is known as being a dispensational movement. Anti-Zionism is listed on this Twitter account as well as something that would identify them. Then also I found a blog by a fellow by the name of Josh Tice, I believe it is, T-E-I-S, where he goes down a little bit more detail as to what this movement is, that they're going to focus less on the third and fourth degree separation, or what they call the hyper separation issues. They are against denominational politics, which I thought was somewhat unusual. I've been a member of different denominations. I am a member of a denomination now, that in an independent church you'd have issues with the denomination. But apparently there's some, which I understand. It's not so much an official type of denomination, but you have a lot of pressure from the outside. If you're going to maintain yourself within that particular group, then you have to toe the line in certain things. So I think that's what he's talking about there. They have a desire to be well-read, which I think is a very good thing. The topics concern me a little bit. Well, first was scriptures, which is a very good thing. History, science, literature, leadership, and pop culture. They said they want to be more read on these issues. I did not find a statement of faith other than what's being mentioned here. As far as reasons for leaving, I think that they have somewhat of the right idea that there are problems in the old IFB. Looking back on it, I saw many problems, which I've already discussed here. But I don't think that this is something that I would be able to do as far as to become associated with these fellows. And there's a couple reasons. One has to do, for one thing, they retain some of the worst elements of the IFB movement. One is the King James only issue. They promote themselves as being King James only. We talked about that before in a couple videos. As I mentioned there, this is not a position that can be defended. It is untenable in the sense that logic doesn't permit it. Historical theology doesn't permit it. We talked about the fact that you cannot transfer the authority of the Greek and the Hebrew manuscripts to an English translation, is what they've done. All of that just doesn't line up with historic Christianity. That's one problem. They also advertise themselves as anti-Calvinistic. Now, I've been in some independent fundamental churches before, and some of them would be very anti-Calvinistic, and some would be leaning towards Calvinism. So I thought that within that movement there was a little bit of leeway. You may be able to hold to some of the points of Calvinism and not be a full-blown Calvinist, as, say, Spurgeon was, and yet still be part of that. Apparently not so with this particular group. They have rejected all of it, which I find very disturbing, that whenever you draw the line and you completely reject Calvinism, you have rejected, of course, Charles Spurgeon, who was an adamant Calvinist, and John Bunyan, and many of the other historical figures of the Christian church, where you cannot go very far with back, and as far as finding the people that aren't Calvinists are difficult to find at a certain point in history. The Reformers, and we've talked about that, I believe. They, however, have cut themselves off from that, completely rejecting Calvinism. The eschatology that they hold, the post-trib, pre-wrath rapture, I'm wondering if that will just simply replace in the dogmatism of the pre-trib rapture. And the reason I'm thinking about this is when I was kind of in between this movement and where I am now, I was considered as a pastor in one of the churches. I candidated in a church, and I was looking over their statement of faith, and I found everything to be in line. The church government I liked, the doctrine I liked. There was one point which I questioned, which had to do with dispensational theology. And because I just simply questioned that, I was just outright rejected as a candidate, that they wanted somebody that could completely fall in line with that way of thinking. And it's not unusual. Another pastor friend of mine who's now retired was going to teach in a school not far from where I live here. And he had same questions about the pre-trib rapture, things like that, dispensational issues. He was rejected from a teaching position in a high school. It wasn't even theology or doctrine. They said, sorry, we just can't allow you to do that if you disagree. So I'm really surprised at this particular point, because the independent fundamentalism held so strongly to the pre-trib rapture. The problem that I believe that they're going to have in this new movement is that they have no real historic foundation. I don't believe they're going to solve the problems that they seek to solve. They see the problems in the old IFB, which I saw as well. They have tried to pull away from that a little bit, the problems, but in doing so, they have no historic foundation. What you have with the Baptists, you could go back to the Baptist Confession of 1689, which is a very good confession, very similar to the Westminster Confession. There's an anchor with history. The fundamentalist movement itself, even though they didn't have a coherent type of a creed, something they would all agree with, like we would have the Westminster Confession or Wesley's Articles of Religion or the Baptist Confession. They didn't have any of that, but they did hold to the Schofield system and the dispensational theology. So what has happened with the new IFB is that they have taken the anchor away from that, that they used to held them together, and now I am wondering which direction that they are eventually going to go. The way things work with this, when it comes to movements, theological movements in churches and whatnot, you have people would pull out, and depending on where they are theologically determines where they're going to go. And I believe that the new IFB, at least from what I've read, I believe what they've done is they've pulled up the stakes. They've cut off the anchors which held them. And I think what's going to happen, maybe not in the first generation, but of course I'm not going to be around to see this, so this is one of those type of predictions. But I think that because they've cut themselves off from the anchor which held them together as fundamentalists, that they're going to be drifting. They're going to just going in several different directions in the future. I noticed that they're looking into the possibility of, say, the contemporary worship issues. That maybe that's not so bad. I think right away when you see some of that's the drift that we're going to see. Let's see here. So just kind of summing all this up, I know this is a little bit of maybe a shorter video, that leaving the independent fundamental Baptist movement, I think that you need to be focused on something that is more solid as far as to become a stable believer. That there's a lot of, I've looked at some of their stuff, some of it looks pretty good, but at the same time, what direction are they going to go? They haven't left some of the things that I felt like was necessary to leave. and the direction they're going in the future, I believe is something to be concerned about. Of course, time will tell, but I just wanted to take a look at that. It's something that kind of interested me at the time. And once again, I thank you for your time.